Ladies and gentlemen, this is a brand new support character tier list to wrap up 2023. Now, this was the list as it was and as I created it almost 6 months ago back in May of this year. Since then, 9 new characters have been added or upgraded in some way, a la, Nick Fury, Shuri, to be support types. So we keep getting, on average, 1.5 new support characters per update. So this list actually changes quite frequently, and so let's update it. First off, I want to go ahead and update some of the mistakes that I made from the previous video. And again, this is just my personal opinion here, but some of these are just straight up fact. I don't know why I put Cassie as a healer. She's not a healer. She has a small buff, but it is one of the best small buffs because it applies to all speed allies, and it gives damage reduction from villains and stuff like that. Victorious, again, not a healer. She just gives allies 30% HP, which is nice, but it's, again, just a small buff. And then also Mantis, she cleanses debuffs as a striker. And then if you put her on the team, she reduces your damage from villains, which, again, is nice, but is also a small buff. So I'm not exactly sure what I was smoking. Whatever it was obviously pretty strong and pretty potent because I had them in the healer category, which basically made no sense. Unless I'm completely missing something about dropping a heal and then switching. Just to recap, though, Weapon Hex creates a bauble that follows you around and heals you. Old Venom, Anti-Venom, or whatever this is called, drops the, War of the Realms Venom drops those blobs that you can pick up when he strikes as a striker. And then, of course, Nadia has the artifact that allows you to heal every few seconds when you use a particular skill. So that's essentially it for the healers. Honestly, I wish we had more healers. I wish there were more supports in the healer category. But let's go ahead and begin here. So first off, I do want to edit the God tier category because of the recent changes to ABX and ABL. I know I say this a lot, and I know I harp on it a lot, but with the recent changes to ABX and ABL, and with the 2 best supports for ABL being White Fox for Luna, and then Morgan Le Fay for all of the villains and all of the universals, it basically makes sense that these are essentially the 2 best supports in the game. It's very unfortunate that they're both seasonal uniforms. I hope that you picked up Morgan Le Fay a couple months back for Halloween. Without the uniform, Morgan doesn't exist on this list. She's not even a support without the uniform. However, White Fox can do with her previous lifestyles 1 uniform versus lifestyles 2. I also want to move M'Baku up to God tier because although he is tier 2 only and there's a whole category for tier 2s, he is insanely good, again, for ABX and ABL. There are others that are here that are also very good for it, like Dazzler, but I just want to highlight M'Baku specifically because unlike a lot of these guys, besides Black Cat, M'Baku has an artifact. So he's sort of in a weird place. He generally shouldn't be a tier 2, but he is. But yeah, everybody knows that. I also want to move some characters out of God tier. I don't think Ebony is God tier anymore. I still think he's okay for PvP. I mean, honestly, I don't know if I'd want to call him a small buff. Like, his buff is good. It's a good buff. It's just that it's not a God tier buff anymore. It doesn't apply to ABX, doesn't apply to ABL, and we just have so many better supports in general for most of their content. I still think he's very good as a support in certain situations, but I don't even think it's for PvP. I'm actually, you know what? We're going to put him in ability buffs here. I think he deserves to be, like, right around here. I think that's fine, and that makes sense. The rest of these here pretty much deserve their ranking. Maybe Taskmaster deserves to be a couple ranks up here. But I do think that this does make sense. Maybe like that, it makes a little bit more sense. I mean, you don't want to rank M'Baku in the sense of, he's unavailable for World Boss Legend and GBR. So you don't want to rank him too high based on that. But he's also very, very good, right? So that also matters. As far as the new characters go, we'll start off with one that I actually missed from the previous video, Groot. Not too interesting here. He has an ability buff, and the ability buff is only for the Guardians of the Galaxy. It does provide a heal as well as some other function. I'll just double check exactly what the text says here. Yeah, they basically get 40% increased damage dealt to boss types, which is very good. And then they also get a heal. So, I mean, it's actually a very good ability buff. Frankly, it's actually a really good ability buff. It's just that it applies to very few characters. So it only applies to, like, of course, the Guardians of the Galaxy. But it's certainly better than Things. So, and oh man, it's certainly better than hers. Wow. I mean, Titania's buff honestly is a small buff. Let's be real. I don't know why I put her an ability buff. I know it's an ability buff because it only applies to a certain group of characters, but it's almost insignificant in the sense of, like, it's just 20% physical attack. It's really not much. It's not like multiple stats like you get with Hulkbuster and War Machine, and it's not like a stat plus an artifact like you get from Robbie Reyes. So yeah, I think this kind of makes sense. It also means that I should probably move Ghost down because hers as well is very niche in the sense that it's she's tier 2 only, which is one thing there. And then it also only applies to certain allies. You know what? I just realized we have Enchantress here, but Enchantress is on the list as well. So Enchantress got a new support that increased her support massively and actually makes her amazing. So she is actually, in my opinion, now in sort of the God tier category. However, as you can see, the God tier category is kind of overflowing. Having placed Enchantress up there, we now move to our next target, which is Spider-Woman. And Spider-Woman, like Groot, affects a small number of characters, i.e. the Spider-Verse characters, but she does provide some very good buffs as well, like offensive buffs for PvE content, as well as having a really good leadership with the debuff cleanse, right? So the debuff cleanse is really, really nice. And then, of course, on her passive for her uniform, she gives Spider Sense allies chain hit, ignore dodge, and damage dealt to boss types. So it's actually like an insane ability buff. Very, very strong. The Spider-Verse characters. Yeah, you mean where do you want to put this? Like, how high do you want to go here with this? It's tough. It's tough here. It's a very, very strong ability buff. This list is starting to bug me because clearly some of these are PvP and some of them are like flexible, like PvE and PvP. There's a lot more value there. Upon further consideration, I've gone ahead and created a brand new category called ABX ABL. And we're going to differentiate between characters who are exclusively used at the moment for ABX and ABL, which I've realized are almost all of the tier 2 characters that were used there as supports. And then we're going to switch the tier 2 category to just being sort of generic PvE buffs that are good, but also just very easy to come by. So I'll explain this a little bit more as I move things around, but we want to move Warwolf and Daisy out here because now there's no tier 2 category. So we're just going to move them to what, in my opinion, is a small buff, because although these buffs can be good, they're also very infrequent, and because they're tier 2 only, they basically you could almost argue that they're very niche buffs. Like, they're good buffs, but you can't use them anywhere. I mean, you can't use them in War Boss Legend because they're tier 2. You can't use them in GBR because they're tier 2. And then you can't use them in ABX ABL because they're not good enough to be used. So in a sense, then they're very niche, and it doesn't really matter to point out that they are tier 2 buffs because all of these tier 2 buffers are used in things like ABX and ABL. So that's actually where M'Baku is going to go now in ABX ABL because he is, exclusively a support for that content. And then people like Mystique are going to go in sort of a generic PvE category where they have like a good buff here, but it's nothing too crazy. And you sort of have a lot of characters that have the same buffs and don't have any additional buffs or any additional value. That's also where someone like Angela will go, where it's just like a 40% increased damage to supervillains, and that's great, and that's used for different content. Don't get me wrong, like it's used for ABX, ABL, but it's also just very generic. And as soon as a better support comes out, these will all be replaced, and in large part, they have been or are actively being replaced. So, for example, Mystique was replaced by Sin, so she's not used anymore for ABX and ABL. You can use her if you don't have Sin, but otherwise she's not as good as Black Cat, of course, and then she's not as good as Sin. Phyla-Vell, same sort of thing, has good buffs, but also has unique buffs, which make her more desirable than just a standard villain support kind of category. So now it makes more sense because when you look at the remaining list of gods, you can see that they all provide immense buffs, but also other things as well. So you have Ironheart, you have Green Goblin, Sif, Ghost Panther, and Wave and Polaris, which all have leaderships in addition to their passive buffs, their support buffs. You have someone like Taskmaster, etc., and Enchantress who have additional buffs to specific categories or types of characters, which goes beyond the standard buffs. And then you have characters like Valkyrie, Morgan, and White Fox who just have like a package of insane PvE buffs or a mixture of PvE and PvP buffs that just make them very, very strong. And this sort of separates them from the rest of the pack here who don't have all of those sort of values combined. Moving back here to the list now, we can see what we're left with. Sister Grimm is absolutely an ability buff here. This is only to magic users, and although it is a heal and a cleanse, which is really nice, so you could technically call her a healer, it is for a very niche category, so it's tough if I want to call her a healer or an ability buff because it only applies to magic users. I'm actually going to put her in the ability buff category. I really like her ability. I just think that it's very, very niche, and it hasn't really seen a lot of use. because of magic characters not making enough of a splash in PvP. So it's sort of weird to put her on the other end of the spectrum as Wong. I think Wong is also a little overrated here, so I'm going to move him down. I think this makes more sense. Certainly, Agent Venom has a much bigger impact for the symbiotes than Wong does for the magic types, in particular for PvP. Shuri, on the other hand, I removed her other tracksuit uniform from the list. She is now a god, mainly because she's just a much better version of Wave, and that actually forces Wave down to PvE. Now, Wave is still very good because she features a leadership and a support, but Shuri is essentially just a better version of Wave. She's cheaper than Wave. She's stronger as a standalone character than Wave, and also she has better buffs than Wave and applies for all of the same content, being a human speed female hero. So yeah, there's really nothing that Wave can't do that Shuri can't just do better, and that's a really important distinction to make, and that's why you can only have sort of one or 1.5, 2 gods for each category. And here we, rarely have any overlap at all. Like, we have 3 villains, but they're each in the category of speed, combat, and blast, right? We don't have very much overlap otherwise for any of these sort of overlapping buffs. The rest of the characters, the last 3, Mysterio, very strong villain lead, or villain support, I should say. I do think he deserves to be... does he deserve to be a god, though? That's tough. I think he does, just based on the fact that we don't have enough blast villain supports. We really only have Enchantress and now Mysterio. Nick Fury, another amazing one here. Not as much use, I would say, as some of the other characters, because speed male heroes don't have as much value in the current meta, but still undeniably strong given his leadership and his support passives, and of course his PvP stuff with the super armor and incapacitation immunity. And then Sin. Sin is actually a god because, like these other characters, like we talked about, she has a leadership and a support, which is super duper clutch. Almost makes me want to take one of the characters in the gods category out and replace them, but at the current time, I don't think there's much justification for any of them. Like, you could maybe make the argument about Sif or possibly somebody else, but it's a tough argument to make. So I'm gonna leave it the way it is for now. It's always tough with supports because people a lot of times just flatten them and say, like, okay, they're a support, they're valuable, and that's certainly the case. But once you get into the realm that we're in now, where you have, like, I don't know, what is this, like 60, 70 supports? There's a lot of support characters. You have to start to be more selective about who you're building up. So I think looking at this list, if you build up all of the people in the dark purple category first and you're done with all of these, I think you've set yourself up with a really good baseline. If you take a look, there's so much balance of typing, male versus female, and hero versus villain. There's a really, really strong balance here. Essentially, the only class not better represented is, I guess, Universals. But Morgan Le Fay is kind of a catch-all for Universals right now because she applies equally to heroes and villains. So she's sort of doing the duty or the work of 2 different typings. For example, like, Nick Fury covering speed males and White Fox covering speed females, for example, right? Or Enchantress covering blast and Mysterio villains, and then Riri covering blast heroes, right? But also applying to all allies. So yeah. But anywho, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of this new support tier list. Does it make sense to you with the new additions and the updates, or do you think it needs more work? Thank you for watching. Smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.